Electrónica de la Universidad de Ohio, un MBA de la Universidad de Pensilvania. Es miembro de varias juntas directivas de la Universidad de Ohio, incluida la Junta Directiva del Departamento de Ingeniería Eléctrica y Ciencias de la Computación de la Facultad de Ingeniería de Rose, la Junta de Visitantes del Presidente y la Junta de la Fundación de la Universidad de Ohio. Entonces, ahora vamos a darle la bienvenida con un fuerte aplauso al señor Gregg Bauer.
Thank you, Elena. Buenos dias. That's going to be about the extent of my Spanish today. We'll talk about that in a second. But I wanted to say thank you to the Chamber for providing this beautiful venue for this conference to take place today. Thank you to Rosa Zulaga and her team at Development Solutions Foundation for all of the work, and I know how much it was that goes into putting a conference on like this. This, as you all probably know, this is not the only conference that she has done in the last week. We did this exact same conference in Bogota last week. So she and her team have been extremely busy. I'd like to thank all of the sponsors that financially make this possible, and obviously thank all of the speakers who are speaking, both the ones from Colombia as well as the international speakers that have come in to do this. Frankly, all of the international speakers are close personal friends of mine, professional friends of mine, so thank you. So, I said, I'm going to tell you a couple stories before we get started up here. One of the things that they teach a professional speaker is that you should always start your speech, your talk, with some humor. Unfortunately, I'm not a professional speaker. So I'm going to start my talk with an apology. And my apology is that I'm not doing this in Spanish. Now, the people ask me, what's my Spanish like? Behind me. And I was speaking to her in my Spanish, and one of the other guys that was there heard her say to her mother that evening, Mama, that American, he speaks a lot of Spanish, but I don't understand a word he says. So consequently, I learned I don't have the Spanish of a 6-year-old. Maybe it's a 4-year-old. But I'm going to do it in English today. I'm going to spare you not understanding anything that I said. Why am I here? I spend about half my time in Colombia now, and have since early 2018. I was invited here to explore some opportunities for one of our startup companies, and found out that was in the early part of 2018, and found out that I actually liked it. But what I really found out was, I think I'm a stray dog. Because you know what they always say, if you feed a stray dog, he'll never go home. And they fed me, and I haven't really gone back home since. But, as Elena said, I'm a lifelong startup entrepreneur and a venture investor. And what I'm going to share with you today are some things that, what is entrepreneuring, what is innovation, what lessons have I learned as a startup entrepreneur that can help you on your journeys for those of you that want to be or are startup entrepreneurs. One more story before we start into the presentation itself, and that is that she mentioned Accelerate Colombia. Accelerate Colombia was born from the very first of these conferences. In February of 2018. Rosa and Development Solutions Foundation asked me if I would be willing to come to Colombia and speak. Same conference here in Medellin, it was at Retiene. And I was so completely blown away by the quality of the startup community, the startup entrepreneurs, the questions I got asked, and so forth, that I called back up to Boston and I said to my partners, I live in Boston, I called back up to Boston and said to my partners, there's something going on here in Columbia that we have to understand, because I sense an opportunity. And I have two principal instincts. I have an entrepreneur's instinct and I have a investor's instinct. So we studied Columbia, and what we came to understand was that indeed my instincts were right, and Luigi talked about some of this morning. My instincts were right, that there is a huge and very, very active startup community in Columbia, and has all of the ingredients for it, but it doesn't have a real startup ecosystem. It didn't have international accelerators. It didn't have a lot of international investors. That's changing. But the idea for Accelerate Columbia was born. And we ran our first cohort in 2019. We're running our third cohort right now. In fact, some of the companies that were in our first cohort and some of the companies that are currently in our third cohort are in this room right now. But this journey's taken us places that I never thought it would take us. I thought we're going to come to Columbia. I like it in Columbia. I like the people, see great opportunities, and we focus exclusively on taking tech startups from Columbia that have an international value proposition and providing them a path towards internationalization in the United States and elsewhere. But this journey's now taken us to Chile, and it's taken us to Mexico, and it will soon take us to Peru. And so what we now call Scale Up LATAM was born. Accelerate Columbia is part of Scale Up LATAM. So what we really have built over this period of time is what I refer to as a bidirectional entrepreneurial superhighway that is connecting the TPP countries of Latin America, Spanish-speaking Latin America, with Estados Unidos, specifically the northeastern part, Boston, New York, where I come from, and where there's one of the very biggest and most active startup ecosystems in the United States. And then we built a venture fund. So Scale Up LATAM Venture Fund, and that fund exists, again, to provide capitalization in the American style of providing capitalization to those companies that have this international value proposition and are internationalizing. When that fund is active now, when we're finally done raising that fund, it will be one of the very largest venture funds in all of Spanish-speaking Latin America. We don't work in Brazil, by the way. And then the journey took us someplace else. Again, unexpected, the journey took us to Italy. And this year, we opened the first cohort of Accelerate Italy. And interestingly enough, the Accelerate Columbia cohort and the Accelerate Italy cohort are operating simultaneously and cross-pollinating one another. So it's been a very, very exciting journey, and it all started at the very, very first DSF conference right here in Medellin. So with that, let's start the presentation. I'm going to skip this. Okay. I like to start my presentations with a bang, so good. You get a bang. Bang. And what are we going to talk about today? We're going to talk about two things. We're going to talk about what is innovation, and we're going to talk about what is startup entrepreneuring from an American perspective. How are those two things connected? So it's an evolutionary, we're going to go on a little bit of an evolutionary trip here together. Again, if I can get this to go, okay. So, innovation first. The very, very first innovation was probably the invention of fire, although I don't know that anybody invented fire, but I will say it was probably the invention of a wheel and a spear. And it's taken us on and on and on, and continues to take us on and on and on. So it really is an evolutionary journey of innovation. And what is innovation? Innovation is what if and what's next. All of you in this room, I'm sure most of you in this room, are innovators. But there have been some innovations that really are changing life as we know it today. Oops. First is SpaceX. Privatization of space. Elon Musk and others are privatizing space. So privatization of space is an innovation. Who would have thought that it doesn't take the United States or China or Russia or some massive country to launch people and objects into space. So privatization of space. Bitcoin. Bitcoin. What's the innovation behind Bitcoin? Well, there's a lot. But obviously the innovation that makes Bitcoin do what it does is blockchain. Blockchain is an innovation. Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies are probably going to change fiat currencies as we know it. And right now, every country, almost every country on this planet, is developing its own crypto coin, cryptocurrency. The human genome, decoding the human genome. In the last 10 years, we've learned to completely decode what makes us up. And through that innovation is enabling scores of other innovations that change the way we live, change the quality of our lives, change the length of our lives, change how disease is being treated, all because we decoded the human genome. Virtual reality. I just picked 4. Virtual reality is again, it seems like it's a cute little thing right now. You got your virtual reality glasses and you can play games and so forth, but it goes well beyond that. It goes into the way that products are being designed. It goes into the way that products are being manufactured. It goes in the way that we're training people for the future. All done by virtual reality. Never leaving, never having to leave your home or your school or wherever it may be, because the world comes to you. You no longer have to go to the world because of virtual reality. These are all innovations. And these are innovations that were developed by people like everyone sitting in this room and everyone watching this conference online today. But what is innovation? What is it really, anyway? Innovation. Okay, it's a much overused word. It's kind of lost a lot of its meaning, to be quite honest with you. But the definition of innovation that we use is a significant movement along one or more main parameters of value. Now you're going to say, what's a main parameter of value? MPVs, that's an acronym, is a key outcome of a product and service that drives the purchase decision. Notice there's an operative word there, 2 operative words actually, purchase decision. Innovations, unless they create a commercial or economic outcome, are not valuable. They didn't say they're not innovations, but they're not valuable. We choose to use, because of the fact that we're entrepreneurs and investors, we choose to use things that are economically oriented. And I think probably many of you in this room would do the same thing. Why do we worry about MPVs? Because 2 principal reasons. As I just said, the primary purpose of an innovation that results in a business is to create growth and profitability in that business. It's an economic outcome. But there's a second reason. The second reason is not so obviously economic, but is probably even more economic than that. An equal goal, and this has become super, super important in the last 5 years, is it's got to change the human condition. As I say here, the upward march of humanity. So every business that you guys have, or may work in addition to having an economic outcome, have to have a social outcome as well. And that social outcome can be a lot of things. That social outcome can be economic development here in Columbia. That social development can be opportunities for people to do things they haven't been able to do before because they weren't economically positioned right. Jobs. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Health. But every business that we look at, every business that we invest in, every business that we invite into the accelerators has to meet both of those 2 conditions. It has to improve human life, and it has to have an economic outcome. MPVs reflect what's important to customers. They're a compass. They're a guidepost. They're something to dead reckon against. But it reflects what's important to customers. And one of the key things that you always learn is, who's your customer? What's your customer need? Well, the MPVs are what's going to drive that purchase decision for them. I'll put all 4 of these up. Here are 4 products that have changed our lives in some way. The iPhone, the smartphone. Everybody's got one in their pocket now. Who would have thought that we're carrying computers around in our pockets at an affordable price that are more powerful than the supercomputers were 15 years ago? Who would have thought? What do you think the main parameter of value is for that? I'm not going to answer the question. I'll let you all think about, you can have your own opinion of what's the main parameter of value, but what's the main parameter of value? The electric car, Tesla. Again, electric cars are becoming ubiquitous, nearly. Particularly with the price of gasoline these days, but becoming ubiquitous. So what is the main parameter of value, in your opinion, for the Tesla or the electric car? The virtual assistant. I know many of you probably have virtual assistants. I certainly do. I control my entire house and my car with a virtual assistant, with my voice. It's cutesy, but it's also functional. Turns on the alarm system, turns off the lights, turns on the water, turns on the irrigation system. It does all those kinds of things. And lastly, I don't know how many of you have taken a personal genetic test, 23andMe, Ancestry, any of those kinds of things. I have. Spit in a tube and send it away, and a couple weeks later, your email lights up, and you find out all kinds of things about yourself that you didn't know. So one of the things that I found out about myself by taking a genetic test, I don't know if this is valuable or not, is that I thought I was 80% German and 20% from the British Isles. Because in America, in the US, we're all mutts anyway. I learned that I'm not. I am 40% German, and I am 20% from the British Isles, but I didn't realize that I was also 40% Swedish. So again, it was interesting. I took the deluxe one, and I got all of my health records too. So they warn you, by the way, when you take one of those tests. They say, be sure you really want this information that we're going to send to you, and they send you about 85 other reports. And knock on wood, there's nothing that's going to kill me tomorrow. But at any rate, so these all have MPVs. And as you think about your products, your innovations, your purchases, what's the MPV that's driving you to make that purchasing decision? And that's defining what the innovation in that product is. And innovation can be different things for different people. So let's switch. Let's connect. Let's begin to connect innovation to entrepreneuring, particularly startup entrepreneuring. So I'll ask the question. You can answer it. Somebody can try to answer it if they want. Does anyone know who the very first entrepreneur was? Very first? Anybody? Guesses? Who? No? Okay. Good try. Let's see. Good try. Okay. Good try. Anybody? Anybody else? I'll tell you. I'll tell you. Very, very first entrepreneur was this guy, Christopher Columbus. Christopher Columbus was one of the very earliest entrepreneurs. Why? Why? Because Christopher Columbus set off to do something that everybody thought was impossible, except him, as a business. Why? Not because he wanted to prove the earth wasn't flat. It's because he wanted to find shorter trade routes to China and India so that those goods could move back to the European countries faster, more economically, and they could make money. That was what Christopher Columbus's idea was. He was an entrepreneur. But like an entrepreneur, he used other people's money to get this done. So do we know her? Okay. Queen Isabella I of Spain was the very first venture capitalist. She gave Christopher Columbus money that wasn't his for a highly risky venture. That's the definition of venture capital. It's part of what I do for a living. And so I think that the best way to learn about entrepreneuring is from other entrepreneurs. Now, we can't go back. I know that as my career progressed in startup entrepreneuring, is if it hadn't been for other entrepreneurs who had been there and done that and been successful, who taught me, I probably wouldn't have continued. But so we can't go back and talk to Christopher Columbus, and we can't go back and talk to Queen Isabella I of Spain, but we can see what they said from their quotes. So, what'd Chris say? He says, by prevailing over all obstacles and distractions, one may unfailingly arrive at his chosen goal or destination. Now, he didn't find the short route to China or India, but he did find that the earth wasn't flat, and he did discover North and South America, and the islands, and so forth. So, in entrepreneuring terms and startup terms, we would call that a pivot. He pivoted, but he was still successful. What did Queen Isabella say? Well, Queen Isabella actually sounds like a venture capitalist. She said, I will assume the undertaking for my own crown of castle, old language, and am ready to pawn my jewels to defray the expenses of it if the treasury should be inadequate to do so. That is a true venture capitalist, if there ever was one. So consequently, entrepreneuring, venture capital have gone back for centuries, and they continue to advance today. So let's look at some modern day entrepreneurs and see what they can teach us. So some of these entrepreneurs you're going to know, and some of them you're not going to know. Obviously, everybody knows Jeff Bezos, founded Amazon, among other things. He's an electrical engineer, by the way. I'm an electrical engineer. Electrical engineers rule. But at any rate, so Amazon. Muhammad Yunus. Now, I'll bet you most of you don't know who Muhammad Yunus is. Muhammad Yunus is a Nobel Prize winner who created microfinance. So many of the entrepreneurs here in Colombia, in India, and other developing nations support their businesses, start their business on the basis of microfinance. Now, I happen to be lucky enough to know Muhammad because I've worked with him for many years on the Holt Prize in Social Entrepreneuring. So really, really interesting guy, super interesting guy. Steve Jobs, no longer with us, God rest his soul, but of course, obviously, Steve Jobs was one of the founders of Apple. Nicholas Negroponte. Now, I'm sure most of you don't know Nicholas Negroponte. Again, I'm lucky enough to know him because I work with him on the Holt Prize. Nicholas Negroponte came out of what's called the MIT Media Lab. And his business, his entrepreneurial venture, was one laptop per child. That's all those green things he's holding up are. He believed, still does believe for that matter, that modern education needs to be supported by having everyone have access to computing power. And he knew that many places children couldn't afford to buy a computer. Schools couldn't afford to buy computers for kids. Now, this goes back 12 years ago. The prices of computers have come down significantly, but those green things he's holding are completely functional laptops that could be purchased for $65 and provided to children in places, inner cities, developing nations where they didn't have access to a laptop. They had Wi-Fi, they had power, they weren't super powerful, but they were laptops. And they charged with a crank. There was a crank on the side. Unfortunately, one laptop per child doesn't exist anymore. But Nicholas is a true entrepreneur. Bill Gates, I skipped one. Bill Gates, Microsoft, we all know Bill Gates. And obviously, there in the middle, the man who's making all the news today is Elon Musk. Elon Musk, SpaceX, Tesla. He's boring the tunnel underneath San Francisco right now to put a mag train in because traffic is too big, too high. Probably the most successful entrepreneur of all of our times, certainly the richest man in the world. But let's see what these guys can tell us about entrepreneuring from their quotes. So let's take them one at a time. Jeff Bezos. What does Jeff Bezos say? I think you'll find these interesting. I do. Failure and invention are inseparable twins. Failure and invention are separable twins. Thomas Edison said, I can tell you 999 ways how not to make a light bulb. He failed 999 times before he was finally successful. So, and if you're afraid of failure, then don't be a startup entrepreneur. I've been part of starting probably 15 companies in my career. Some of them successful, a couple of them went public. Some of them are sitting in boxes in my garage. But I learned as much from the ones that are sitting in boxes in my garage are the ones that were completely successful. Muhammad Yunus. All human beings are born entrepreneurs. Some get a chance to unleash that capacity. Some never get that chance. Never know that he or she has that capacity. I believe, and many of you here or are watching, because you are interested, either are or are interested in entrepreneuring. And I believe that every one of you has it in you. And I'll tell you some things that you can actually practice and learn later on in the presentation. What did Nick say? Companies cannot really see beyond their current customer base. The explicitly or implicitly do things to protect their current customers. That's what they do. Why? Because they think they've got something to lose. They think they have something to lose, so they're not going to take any risks. And the last person to want real change is your customer. That's why most new ideas come from small companies that have nothing to lose. Let that sink in. We'll talk more about that later. But most companies, most new inventions, most new products don't come from the big companies. They come from people like us. And the big companies adopt them. I'm going to go back to Apple for a second. Steve Jobs, he's coming up, actually. Is Apple an innovator? No. Apple's not an innovative company. You may think they're an innovative company, but they're not an innovative company. They're a fast follower. That's what's known as a fast follower. They let somebody else take the risk. And once the thing has been de-risked, then they improve on it dramatically. That was Steve Jobs' real skill, was a fast follower and an improver. Oh, speaking, Bill Gates. Success is a lousy teacher. It seduces people into thinking they can't lose. Again, now, you got to have some failures before you can appreciate successes. You got to have a rainy week before you can really appreciate a string of sunny days. You got to have a yin with your yang, so to speak. So, and for entrepreneuring, it's success and failure are the yins and the yangs. Steve Jobs, here we go. I knew he was coming up. You can't ask customers what they want and then try to give it to them. By the time you get it built, they'll want something new. Okay, what does that say? What is he really saying in those words? What he's saying is, people don't know what they want. You can't ask them what they want. What you need to understand is what they need and address that need. That's what Apple does, is it lets somebody else fail, and then they address the needs of customers. So you respond to needs, not to wants. And then Elon Musk. Elon gets two quotes. Both, I think, were good, so I just took two. Some people don't like change, but you need to embrace change if the alternative is disaster. Now, why did I pick that quote for this particular conference? This conference is about economic revitalization of the economy following a pandemic. We've all had to change. We all have to respond to it. We can't be afraid of it. In fact, we have to embrace it. And that's what's going to make Colombia, the rest of the world, a bigger and a better place as a result of something that was really horrible in the pandemic. And then Elon's last quote about being an entrepreneur, what it's like to be an entrepreneur. Being an entrepreneur is like eating glass and staring into the abyss of death. It's true. It's really, really true. You don't know that. It's also the most amazing thing you'll ever do. But you don't know that until, I know you don't use checks in Colombia, so I'm going to try to. But when your startup is not going exactly as well as you would like it to, you have to make payroll that week, and you take the last of your savings out of your savings account, knowing that you're dead if some money doesn't come in someplace, and using that money to make payroll so the people that are working with you and working for you can eat. That's what he means. And that is what, I've done that. That's what it's like to be a startup entrepreneur and looking into the abyss of death. So how's the entrepreneur's way of working evolved? It's changed a lot. I mean, it used to be they worked in big companies and they sat around and did whatever they were told. People probably know what this is. This is Hewlett-Packard's garage. Hewlett-Packard, the company, was founded in this garage. It was Hewlett's garage. Hewlett and Packard worked in that garage to form Hewlett-Packard. That was how they worked. That goes back 120 years ago, but that's how they worked. It's moved now to many places that are called like co-working spaces, where we're coming together, we're using shared resources, where there's some level of collaboration. WeWork would be an example of a co-working space today, where innovation has become, in a co-working space, it's still not a team sport. It's still an individual sport. But at least you've got a different kind of environment to do it, and you can share things with one another. Startup entrepreneuring really is a team sport, however. You can't do things alone. We're going to talk a little bit more about that. But if you don't have a team around you, or if you don't embrace the team you have around you, you're going to destine yourself to almost sure failure as an entrepreneur. Come on. Then a new kind of space has come together that is a collaborative working space. What's shown here is something called the Cambridge Innovation Center. The Cambridge Innovation Center is in Boston. It's where our offices are, actually, is in the Cambridge Innovation Center. It's a very unique place. But in that one building, there's several of them, but in the one where our office is, they say there are more startups in that one building than any place else on the planet. There's over 400 startup companies in that building. And we collaborate, and we work, and we share. And it's designed in such a way to do that. And of course, it's connected. Everything is connected now. So the way we work as entrepreneurs is very, very different than it was 15 years ago or 18 years ago when I first started this journey. It also costs a lot less to do it than it used to. Back when I was part of doing a large enterprise software company called DataWare, we had a team of developers it's probably 100 developers on that team. Big office space, it was lots of capital. It was a very expensive thing to do. You don't do that anymore. We work in a gig economy. You don't really have many employees, and people don't want to be employees. People would much rather say, I'll work on this project today, and I'll go find another project to work on tomorrow, and so forth. So your costs of carrying have gone down. Your costs of prototyping have gone down dramatically with 3D printing and virtual reality and things like maker spaces. The cost of developing code has gone down significantly if you're in a coding business. The cost of developing code has gone down significantly because things like no-code and low-code kinds of environments, you can develop things so much more quickly and so much more expensively because of the innovations that other people have brought to bear. Interesting fact, truth. Over 50% of all American jobs are created by startups. And the definition of a startup for this particular statement is a company that's been in business less than 2 years. So you think about the American economy and think about over 50% of the jobs are created by companies that weren't in business 3 years ago or 4 years ago. Pretty impressive. By the way, I see the same thing happening in Colombia. It's going to happen in Colombia. Also, entrepreneuring is no longer a local activity. It's a global activity. One of the things demonstrated the very fact I'm here talking to you today, and the very fact Accelerate Colombia has come together, is we're collaborating, and the fact that the Accelerate Italy cohort and the Accelerate Colombia cohort are in fact collaborating. In fact, they're going into a meeting in 20 minutes together, is the fact that this is truly a global economy we're living in, and it's a global sport. So who's in the ecosystem? Well, you've got companies like, these happen to be Boston-centric, I'm sorry, although apps.co is here, companies that are incubating, creating an environment where entrepreneuring can happen. These are where the companies that typically work or operate in places like this are what I refer to as babypreneurs. They're first-time entrepreneurs, they're first-time companies that are just coming together. Cambridge Innovation Center, Greentown Labs, those are two places in Boston. Cambridge Innovation Center is actually worldwide. But again, places where they're coming together, and in Greentown Labs, it's in Boston, it's the largest clean tech incubator in the world. There's labs, there's machine shops, there's wet space, there's prototype space, there's meetups, there's all kinds of things that happen there. And some amazing, amazing hard tech is coming out of Greentown Labs, all for clean environment. There's accelerators. There's Accelerate Colombia and Scale Up Latam, but there's 500 startups, and there's Techstars, and there's Generator, and there's a couple of good acceleration programs here in Colombia, in Bogota particularly. If you've got Rockstart and you've got Hubbug, both in Bogota. Both, but they're accelerating locally, but they're part of the ecosystem, and more acceleration programs are beginning to come to Colombia and to Latin America because they recognize the level of talent that's here and the opportunities that exist. You've got the socially oriented programs. Halt Prize is there. I've been a mentor on the Halt Prize since its beginning for 13 years. It's called the Nobel Prize for Students because it's $1 million prize that's given each year to a group of students who have responded to a challenge that the Halt Prize has put out and formed a business around that challenge. And I'm proud to say that last year's program was a little bit different. We actually had 6 winners, not one. It's normally just one. And 2 of my companies that I mentored, one of them is a company called Siembraco from Colombia, from Bogota, from the Universidad de Rosario. And they were one of the first Colombian team to ever win, a company to ever win the Halt Prize. Very, very proud of them, super proud of them. And you've got the big companies. Big companies are part of the ecosystem. Big companies often provide the exit for the startups. And clearly, you've got government-sponsored programs like Andy of the Future, Rutene here in Medellin, Impulsa, Sena, others there. And they're a key part of the ecosystem, but I'm going to give you my personal prejudice. I don't think governments shouldn't be in the center of trying to do it. What government should be doing is creating an environment where innovation, entrepreneuring can happen, and letting the private sector do it. The Boston Innovation District is there. That's a really interesting place. That was created by the mayor of Boston back about 10 or 11 years ago. There was a very large tract of land down by one of the waterfronts that was nothing but parking lots. And I kind of miss it because it was a cheap place to park. But at any rate, he declared it an innovation district. He declared it tax breaks and support and expedited building permits and all kinds of things for companies to go into the innovation district. It's no longer parking lots there. Now some of the most amazing, beautiful buildings headed with some of the most interesting corporations in the world that have made their headquarters in the innovation district. And it was all done by the private sector. Didn't cost the government a penny or a peso. So that's my prejudice, is I think governments need to do what governments do, and that's create an environment and then step back and let things happen. Where's the money come from? How do you do this? Well, how do we create and realize value? Operative word on that slide is value. It comes from incubators and angels. Angel investors are often a good source, particularly an early source of money for startups. It comes from, crowdfunding. Crowdfunding has become very popular in the last 10 years. And there's different kinds of crowdfunding programs. There's crowdfunding programs that only do tech. There's crowdfunding programs that only take equity. There's crowdfunding programs that provide loans. There's crowdfunding programs that only do socially oriented ventures. So there's a crowdfunding program for just about everybody. And there are crowdfunding programs that focus here in Latin America. Then there's venture capital. Obviously, you probably all know what venture capital is, but that's part of what I do, is venture capital, where we take other people's money and invest it for them into risky ventures, like Queen Isabella did. And then, of course, there's the exit. And the exits, IPOs are rare, but the exits are often acquisitions, partnerships, large corporations getting involved, those kinds of things that provide a source of capital for the startups that we all create. What's the life cycle? We start with an idea. First place the money comes from is from us, from you. Nobody is going to fund your startup for you when it's still an idea. Nobody's going to fund your startup for you if you haven't been willing to put your own money into it and take a risk. So that's why there's a wallet and credit cards there. And again, yes, I have used my wallet and my credit cards to fund some of the startups that we've been involved in. Then there's the crowdfunding. We just talked about crowdfunding. There's accelerators, Kickstarter's crowdfunding. I'm sorry, that first one wasn't crowdfunding. That first one was what I refer to as the triple Fs. Triple Fs are friends, family, and fools. So usually the second place, once you have proven that your startup is going to be successful with using your own money, then the next place that people usually go is to their friends and their families, and they put small amounts of money in to get them over the next hump. I do talk about fools because occasionally there are people who are just completely foolish and put their money into a venture where they don't really know the people because they think they're going to be rich someday. So I call that friends, families, and fools. There's the incubators. There's the accelerators. I'm going fast now, so we have time for questions. There's venture capital, and obviously there's the IPO. The buttons are a little sensitive. Okay, so let's change this up a bit. I said that I and my partners in Boston are all lifelong startup entrepreneurs and investors. So what are some of the lessons that I've learned about being a startup entrepreneur that you may find helpful to you? First, start a business, not a startup. Businesses have a path to profitability. Otherwise, it's a hobby. So make sure you're serious about this. They have a path to profitability. Otherwise, it's a hobby. So think about that. Okay, here's one of my faves. Ignore the real world. Ignore the real world. It's a place where ideas, foreign concepts, unfamiliar opportunities always lose. I'm reading it here. The real world isn't really a place. It's an excuse. It's an excuse for not trying. So, how does this manifest itself? I can guarantee you that if you're currently starting a startup or you're currently contemplating starting a startup or something like that, and you go out and start asking people, hey, this is what I'm going to do. This is what I'm going to do. You'll find more people will tell you, that's a stupid idea. Muy stupid idea. Then they'll say, wow, that's a really good idea. You ought to go for it. Well, it's your life. It's your idea. Everybody has an opinion. But I'm really saying to you, ignore the real world. If you believe in it, if you believe in it strongly enough, go try to make it happen. You may fail, but so what? We talked about that already. Failure is a good teacher, and you won't fail this. You won't fail the same way twice. but it's a good teacher. Just ignore the real world. Don't let people tell you, what's right for you. Embrace risk. We talked about this a little bit. Corporations try to manage risk. Corporations say, I got stuff to lose. I got customers to lose. I got revenues to lose. So I'm just going to take something that looks a new idea or a new venture, and I'm just going to manage that to the point where there's no risk left. And then they say, why aren't we ever successful in innovating? Why aren't we ever successful in starting new businesses? Why aren't we getting a return on the money we spend? Entrepreneurs do it exactly the opposite. We exploit risk. Risk is our friend. Without risk, there's no opportunity for returns. So you embrace risk. It's a dichotomy of thinking. And if you don't think you're somebody who can really wrap their head around that, then my strong advice to you is get a job. Don't do a startup. Two most important questions that an entrepreneur can ask themselves. These are really, really important questions. And they're really simple. There's two questions, and there's only 4 words in total in both questions. But they're the hardest questions to answer. So what? Who cares? So what? Who cares? Make sure you're solving a problem that really fits a market need. Main parameter of value, again. And just because you think it's something that's really, really cool, doesn't mean the world's going to think it's really, really cool. So how do you use these questions? How do you use these questions? You have to look at yourself in the mirror, and you have to say, so what? Who cares? And be honest about answering those questions. In order to be able to answer those questions honestly, you might have to admit that your baby is ugly. And nobody wants to admit that their baby is ugly. But those are the 2 hardest questions to answer. Live it or leave it. Oops, sorry. Stand for something about winning. Standing for something is not about writing it down. It's not about writing a business plan. It's about believing in it and living it. And again, when I'm talking to newer entrepreneurs, I'll ask them this question around this particular point. I'll say, are you a chicken or are you a pig? And they always look at me, what do you mean? Chicken and pig, chicken and pig. Well, I say, okay, think about this. Think about a typical breakfast of huevos y chicharrón. It's on your plate. The chicken's involved in that breakfast, but the pig is fully committed. So are you a chicken or are you a pig? Or live it or leave it. No time is no excuse. There's always plenty of time if you use it right. And if you constantly fear that you're not getting things done perfectly, then you're not going to get things done. So no time is no excuse. If you're not growing, you're shrinking. Growth, not profitability, is the key thing for a startup, particularly at the early stages of a startup. Is as investors, as U.S. investors, American investors, we don't care about profitability. We're investing in growth. We know that the profitability is going to come if things go right. So you're focusing on growth. So when an entrepreneur says, particularly an earlier stage entrepreneur says, look at our EBITDA or look at our EBIT, we'll say, we don't care about your EBIT. Tell us about your growth. Tell us where that growth is going to come from. Tell us what that growth curve is going to look like and make us believe that you're really going to achieve that. And then we'll talk to you about investing. We talked about this. The initial funding is going to come from you when you do a startup. It's not going to come from other people's money. It's going to come right out of your pocket. So be prepared for that to happen. The other people's money will come later. Failure is inevitable, but it's not a rite of passage. You learn from your successes, and as I said about the boxes in my garage, you learn from your failures. And failures are usually better teachers. And I believe it was, who was it that said that? Forgotten. One of the entrepreneurs said that. Forgot which one it was. And it doesn't. And evolution, Mother Nature, is the greatest innovator of all times. Mother Nature doesn't linger on her past failures. When Mother Nature makes a new plant, or Mother Nature makes a new bird, or Mother Nature makes something, if it doesn't work, she just doesn't do it again. But she learns from that and improves it. So over time, that system, that plant, that bug, that bird, evolve into something that survives. And when you do fail, do it super fast. Do it fast. Ask yourself that question, so what, who cares? And if your baby's ugly, admit your baby's ugly. Do something different, pivot, change. A couple cartoons. On the other hand, you need to know when to let go of a bad idea. That's what we're talking about in failure. I see some pictures, so I'll hold that for a second. Okay. Planning is guessing. Planning is guessing. Plans let the past drive them. You don't have information unless you're looking at the past. So if you're going to spend all your time trying to write a 5-year plan, forget it. You can do 3-year projections, and you have to do some, but you have to do that. You can't connect dots going forward that don't exist. You can only connect dots in the past. So planning is only guessing. And if you really think that you can plan 3 to 5 years in the future, then I would suggest you leave this conference right away and get into the stock market, because that's where you're really going to be most economically successful, if you can really plan in advance. There are no original ideas. The world is really full of smart people. And so don't think that someone hasn't had your idea before, because I guarantee you they have. I guarantee you they have. And they may have tried it and marginally succeeded. They may have tried it and failed. They may have tried it and been quite successful. But learn from that. Learn from that. Don't think that your idea is original. And whenever I'm personally working with a startup, and the startup says to me, we don't have any competitors, that's when I say, that's when you really need to worry. You do have competitors. Trust me, you've got competitors. And if you really, truly don't have competitors, then you need to be worried, because probably it's not going to work. Probably somebody's tried it and it doesn't work. So no, there are no original ideas. Find a happy band of volunteers. You can't do this alone, and you haven't got any money, so you can't pay people a lot. So you find a happy band of volunteers, people that are going to join your mission with you and carry it along. Every startup we have ever done has volunteers. And volunteering is a very rewarding experience. So a couple quotes on volunteers. Volunteers do not necessarily have the time, they just have the heart. Thank you, most of them. And volunteers don't get paid not because they're worthless, because they're priceless. Key part of your team are volunteers. Don't think that you are the company. It says here, my strategy has always been to surround myself with good people, then I duck down and sneak out the back door when no one's looking. Don't think that you are the company. One thing that just makes my blood boil, and there are some of our companies here that may have actually heard me say this to them, is when they say, when I'm talking to the CEO and he says, my company, my team, my idea, my business, it makes my blood boil because you are not the company. The company is the team around you. The company is your customers. The company is your investors. The company are your volunteers. That is the company. You are not the company. Pick a fight. Pick a fight. Competition is super good. Competition gives us something to, gives us an enemy, and we all need an enemy. We all need something to make us really emotionally charged up. And so pick a fight, and that ignites your personal passions. Remember not to get carried away with your valuation estimates or fall in love with your idea. Again, one of the things, early stage, we hear companies will come to us and say, our company is worth $5 million valuation. And we'll say, oh, okay. How did you arrive at that? Well, because it is, because we think it is. Well, do you have any investors that have invested in your company and set a valuation on the company? No. Have you gotten any investment in the company? No. Do you have any revenues? No. Well, then your company's not worth $5 million. Don't fall in love with it. So again, this cartoon is, I have a great idea for a startup company. All I need is a seed investor and an engineer to do all the work. And his coworker says, I believe the economic term for what you have is nothing. So again, remember, create value in your company. It's about creating value. Get a life. Working all the time doesn't mean, doesn't get things done better. It just uses up your days. We all, as startup entrepreneurs, have this tendency to work too much. So make some time for yourself. And the last one, sales is not a department. Sales is not a department. Accounting is a department. In a startup, everybody is in sales. It's not just the person or people that have sales in their title or business development in their title. The CEOs in sales, the CTOs in sales, the CFOs in sales, the marketing VPs in sales, the developers are in sales. In a startup, sales is king. You're always selling, and it's everybody's job to sell. So with that, I'm getting the hurry up sign. With that, muchas gracias. Thank you very much. I said I wouldn't do more Spanish. Thank you. Thank you. This is my contact information for anybody who might want it. And you can scan the code and it takes you to my LinkedIn. And if we have time, I'll take questions. Oh, back. Okay, hang on. You're gonna see that again. There we go. Okay. So if we have time, dos questions. Okay, we have time for 2 questions. Anyone got any questions? Have I done too good a job? Or too bad a job? Really? Is that a question? That's too bad a job? I said too bad a job. You guys thumbs up? See. Oh, I might need this. Hang on a second. This is turned on. This is turned on. Yes.
Mr. Bauer, de la diferencia entre los países emprendedores y no emprendedores, no es la falta de pasión. ¿Qué es? Apoyo gubernamental, decisiones, programas como Shark Tank han contribuido a confiar en los emprendedores.
That was the question. Okay. See? I think questions of Shark Tank have made on... Oh, thank you. Okay. I think that programs like Shark Tank have made people more aware of entrepreneuring, but remember, Shark Tank is entertainment. Shark Tank is designed to sell commercials and designed to sell network time. It's not real. It's not what entrepreneuring really is like, but it is entertaining, and I think it has caused a greater awareness of entrepreneuring.
Lo hiciste súper bien. Gracias, maestro. Bienvenido a Colombia. Artesanos Emprendedores, municipio de Bello.
Thank you very, very much. Guys, one more? I'll take one more. Okay.
Muchas gracias por la intervención, por la enseñanza, pero también considero que hay problemas estructurales de la sociedad que a veces no dejan progresar a nuevas empresas porque hay manipulación del mercado por corrupción y malos manejos. Desde su punto de vista, ¿cómo ve esta situación de la corrupción en Colombia que afecte a pequeños emprendedores?
That's a loaded question. I think corruption there's corruption in the United States too. Don't think there's not. I think indeed corruption can cause headwinds for startups, but I don't see it as being, I'm trying to find a way to measure my words a little bit. I don't see corruption as being something that should prevent you from doing startups. As a matter of fact, it's corruption and things like corruption and things like social inequities and some of those kinds of things that startups will solve. And one of the things, and Jose, who's going to be a speaker later today, I'm sure we'll talk about this in his talk on megatrends, is that things like the things that have been the systemic cause of corruption in Colombia and other places for that matter are being disrupted by instant communications, by social media, by the ability of people to talk in multiple time zones and in multiple cities simultaneously about things. Those are breaking some of the pillars of corruption. But I honestly believe, as sure as I'm breathing, I honestly believe that it's startups, startup entrepreneurs, and so forth that will address the core challenges that society faces in general and that Colombia faces in particular. And that's one of the reasons that we're here. That's one of the reasons that we work here, is again, remember, we're entrepreneurs. And without risk, there's no opportunity for return. And we see we do see risk in Colombia. We see risk in Latin America in general. But in that risk is where lies the opportunities for return. So that's why I'm here. Okay. One more in the back.
Do you have time for one more
let me move to headset.
Hello? Okay. If I talk, will he hear me? Yeah? Can you hear me, Greg? Okay. So my question is, thanks so much for the presentation.
What? Okay, I got that part. Okay.
Thanks so much for the wonderful presentation. My question is, there's obviously a reason after being a successful global investor that you've chosen to establish an accelerator here and work with founders here. Can you talk to us a little bit about what you think are some of the unique qualities that make for Colombia specifically such a successful haven for entrepreneurs and startups?
Thank you, Melissa. I will. What did we see? What did we see when we got here? We saw people who are particularly here in this part of the country where the Paisas are. We saw people who have a long family history of entrepreneuring, whether it's an empanada stand or whether it's a small store or whatever the case may be, a long history of entrepreneuring. We saw, so it's a cultural thing. We saw a very good higher education system. We saw particularly here in this area, we saw a deep, deep interest in it. We saw people who were very creative, and some of the best ideas I've ever seen are coming out of Colombia in particular. We saw, there's a whole host of things. We saw people we see people that are inherently friendly, and for the most part, aside from some of the corruption, for the most part, inherently honest and want to do the right thing. We saw all of those things, and then what we saw is where the opportunity lies. Then what we saw is that the ecosystem here was not supporting the level of skill and interest in startup entrepreneuring, and so a hunger for some American know-how. So we saw that as an opportunity, but what we saw also is that two challenges that the community has. One is a lack of capital. Venture capital is pretty immature here and very small. We saw people using a lot of debt, and you can't run a startup on debt, certainly not the bank debt like you were getting here. And we saw a lot of opportunity for solving international and global problems. And if we provided a path to that, which also provides a path to international capital, the opportunity was that it created a significant opportunity for when the company actually raises its first international capital, particularly if it's internationalized to a larger market, the valuation of the company jumps immediately. And it's the valuation by 4.5 times on average, by the way. So when that valuation jumps, the opportunity for making a return on our investment also jumped. And it provides the entrepreneurs then the fuel they need to build their business, to grow their business here in Colombia, to create more opportunities and more jobs and solve some of the economic and social problems that were here. That's a long answer to a short question, but that was what we saw. I'm happy to talk more about that later with anybody. Okay, I think I'm getting the hook. Thank you again very much. It's been a pleasure to talk to you today.
Gracias, señor Bauer.
Mucho gusto.
Continuamos con nuestra jornada de la mañana, la cual además de productiva nos ha dejado grandes enseñanzas y aprendizajes. Ahora queremos invitar a una de las personas que desde el país está al frente de una de las entidades más importantes en la promoción de emprendimiento y de innovación. Carlos Mario Estrada Molina, director del SENA, administrador de negocios de la Universidad de AFIT en Medellín, donde también cursó una especialización en mercadeo y una maestría en gobierno y políticas públicas, impulsor de la innovación y el desarrollo tecnológico desde el sector privado en compañías como Movistar, EPM y Edatel. Su experiencia en el crecimiento del sector